Did you miss me? Welcome to Reviewlijam, the show where I review whatever the hell I want, because it's my show, not yours. I can't believe I'm filming another video. This is unheard of for me to keep something up. Don't get me wrong, we're on episode 2, but you know, progress. Today, I'm reviewing the play Clarkston, which just finished its run in the Trafalgar Theatre. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. Like, subscribe, watch this video. This jumper is amazing. I love it. Thank you, Storefront, based in Derry. That's not an ad. I just think I look really good in it. So, what is Clarkston about? Clarkston is about Jake and Chris, who work together in Costco. Yeah. So, what is Clarkston about? Clarkston is about Jake and Chris, who work together in a Costco as they develop their relationship together. It is a three-hander, which means there are only 3 characters present ever on stage, that being Jake, Chris, and Chris's mum, Trisha. It follows Jake as he has moved down to Clarkston, the town, and follows his journey through working there with Huntington's disease, a disease where essentially he makes lots of involuntary movements and doesn't have full control of his body. It's a poignant and developed piece about legacy, about self-worth and trying. If I had to describe this show in one word, it would be trying. It's also going to be my first 5-star review. I'm aware it's only my second video, but I have high standards, and it's the only show that I saw that trip, and I think there are only 2 shows that I saw this year, and I saw maybe 15 shows that get 5 stars. Yeah. So it follows Jake, who is a descendant of William Clark, who was a real person, a real colonizer of the States. He was commissioned to explore the United States of America over 200 years ago. If you think I keep looking down, it's because I have the program in front of me. That's where I'm getting a lot of my facts and figures from, because I don't want to get it wrong. And this is my second video. I'm not getting a teleprompter. Yes, so they travelled between 1804 and 1806 through America and colonized a lot of it. Yeah, yay, colonization. It's touched on in the play that colonization isn't necessarily a great thing, but I think it really plays into the theme of legacy, where you want to be remembered, which I think was a really touching tone throughout this play, of wanting to be remembered for something. I said it's a 3-hander. Those 3 hands, or 3 characters, were delicately and deliberately portrayed by Joe Locke, Rory Mullica, and Sophie Melville. And it's not something that I will usually call out, because I think that they have a very limited choice in the show, and there's obviously a lot more to it. But Stuart Burt, who's the casting director, and Taylor Williams, who was the casting consultant, did an impeccable job, which, especially having Joe Locke as your Hook, who is becoming a massive name, but to cast him so brilliantly, they deserve credit for that. They also deserve credit for Rory and Sophie's casting, because their performances were something unlike I've ever seen. I will talk more about it later. I'll go more into depth, but I just have to call it out right now. Yeah, so most of the play is set either in the stockroom of a Costco or in the parking lot outside, with the notable exception being towards the end, spoilers, when they visit a beach or visit the sea for the first time. And the setting is minimal, and yet it's so deliberate. At times, I found myself watching the boxes that they were placing more than the actors putting the boxes on the shelf. And it's a lot of Americanized names, like cheese puffs and things like that. But it was such a gorgeously minimal set, in that the only piece of set that stayed on the stage continuously is a big... You've seen the Costco, like, shelves that go all the way to the ceiling. This was that. And they brought things on and off. They were actually, like, working throughout the play, which I thought was really nice. And then they would bring, say, like, a trolley on, which I think was a really nice use of the space, because it's quite a big stage, I think. But it was really empty in the sense of all of the doors were exposed. So anytime anyone entered or exited, you could see it from the moment they went on. And they really used those stairs up and down to the doors, because they were like 3 steps up or 3 steps down, to the full advantage, where there's this scene where Trisha, Chris's mum, is standing staring, and it starts the scene with her higher, which they use a really nice use of levels. Particularly, there's a scene where they're arguing and Chris is on a ladder. And the level usage of this was gorgeous, especially for it not being the biggest theatre. So yeah, I want to give credit to the set designer, set and costume designer, which is Mila Clark, who did a really nice, minimalistic set that told an entire story. Also props to the lighting designer Stacey DeRosier, of which I will talk about a little bit later. So Joe, Rory, and Sophie were all brilliant, and they all had this dynamic relationship with each other, which you need when there's only so few cast members on stage. Chris and Trisha had this gorgeous depth, which, and this is no fault of Joe, but Joe sometimes got left out of, which makes sense, because Rory and Sophie are playing mother and son. And so there was this really nice intricacy of Joe or Jake sometimes being our eyes in which we saw things. There's a moment towards the end where it's revealed that Trisha is using again. She is on, I believe it's heroin, I think. And it's this beautiful, raw, honest moment where Sophie was screaming. And I don't understand this because she was screaming her lungs out at at Chris, trying to get him to go with her. And I think that it was done. Ooh, that was the moment that sold this as a 5-star play for me, because she was screaming and her throat was hoarse. And I don't understand how you can do that so many times a week. Maybe I just saw a really good night because I saw it final week. But I thought it was something unlike I've ever seen on a stage before. Because it was challenging, and I want to give Sophie Melville all the props here for her portrayal of Trisha. In that climactic scene where it's revealed that Trisha is using again, you could see from the moment she was on stage that she had used. And it wasn't an explicit thing that she did, or even anything that she said or how she said it. This is an actress who has not just talent, but the skills to back up that talent. It's like... Do you ever hear the saying there was no light behind their eyes? Like when they're smiling. It was like that. Where Sophie was doing everything right. Everything to convince her son that she hadn't been using. And yet you could feel it. The cynical might say that energy doesn't exist. In the sense of there are so many little things that make tension, like you can't really feel it, you just pick it up very quickly. No. This challenged not my belief of it. I really believe in energy, particularly on a stage. But this proved it for me, that energy, and yes, it might just be lots of microscopic changes that create this energy, but by goodness, Sophie Melville knows how to create that. You could see from the moment she stepped on stage that something was different, and you knew what it was. You didn't want to believe it, but you knew it. Joe as our, I want to say protagonist, because a lot of the play is centered around his journey with Huntington's disease, having travelled down to Clarkston. Joe played this so well, and I want to highlight his use of physical acting, in that with Huntington's disease, he was not always able to control the movements as a character, but as an actor, you really felt that he couldn't control the movements, and that he was like trying to force them down, but he couldn't. And a lot of that intricate thought work had been put in place, where he was trying to walk through it or use it as an excuse. There was always a thought behind the movements. It was usually a leg. If you notice my hand bumping up and down, I'm recreating it in my body because it really was that special, and his use of physical acting should be commended. The American accent it slipped sometimes, and there is a moment that I will talk about later that is the only reason why I think that Rory and Sophie sold this completely. But Joe should be commended. He did a fantastic job. Rory, by far, was the center of this play. There was so much vibrancy and fear and not just a fully developed character. Rory created a whirlwind of emotion, and you could see every thought that passed through his brain. You could see every movement, whether planned or unplanned, that went through his body. It was a masterclass in acting. And I fully mean a masterclass. Which, for Rory to be seemingly the least not professional, but like he is the least like well-known works, or I mean, Sophie has a theatre credit which is just as long as my arm, and Joe is an up-and-coming star who has been on Broadway, has just finished a extended show on the West End, is working with Netflix, is working with Disney Marvel. Yeah. For Rory to come in as this underdog with two giant figures, he didn't just hold his own, he soared. And it was mesmerizing to watch. You were hooked on every single breath he took, every word he said, even when he was reading his horror stories that Chris had written. You were hooked and then hooked by his story. And there was this really nice moment towards the end where he was crying in Jake's lap, and he was turned away from the front of the audience, but there was audience on the stage as well. But you could still see all of the emotion. And I think that shows just how talented of an actor he is, and someone I will follow their career because they deserve it wholeheartedly. Yeah, I've touched on the vocal skills, but the voices were clear, the accent, the diction was amazing, which I am finding it slightly difficult in theatre at the moment, particularly I want to say the West End, because that's where a lot of my seeing theatre comes from. I'm taking issue with a lot of diction, where I am losing a lot of words. I went to see The Weir. Hopefully I'll post a review of that. And some of the diction got lost, but also some of the accent work got lost. And I've already spoken about The Devil Wears Prada, where a lot of it was really nice, particularly Emily, who's an English accent, but English accent, you kind of need to have all of that diction. And I think that some of the diction work got lost in a lot of the other shows I saw, whereas in Clarkston, every word was clear, every word was defined, even when, as I mentioned, Trisha was screaming, you still understood every single word. And I think that is something to be commended. Yeah. As I mentioned, after the climax, the final breath of the play is something that has been a theme throughout, which is Jake and Chris wanting to see the ocean. Chris's story is about a lighthouse looking over the ocean, but Chris himself has never seen the ocean, and Jake wanted to make it to the other coast. And I live next to the ocean. Right now, if I look out my window, I can see the ocean. The ocean means a lot to me. And so this was a very personal part of the play to me, where I think that the author of the play, Samuel D. Hunter, really captured the vastness and the brilliantness of the ocean as a being. Because the ocean is a being. It's massive, it's huge, but it has a personality. And that was really captured, where there's a moment where Chris is like, I've seen it, but then starts, I think, crying. I cannot remember for sure because this happened about a month ago. I really should just go and see theatre and then record, but no. There's an exercise by Lecoq that I did whilst I was training as an actor, and it's an exercise where you have to watch a boat leave the port, and you have to, like, without moving, picture it in your body and internalize it, which, yes, is also to do with the ocean, but I think that it's a really good exercise for this show because so much of it is invisible acting. And I think that the moment when Chris and Jake see the ocean for the first time, we really see, from Rory particularly, I want to say the Lecoq exercise, because you can see every thought that goes through Rory's brain, where he processes the information like it's his first time seeing the ocean, which once again is testament to Rory's craft and his absolute confidence to do things like that. I think that I think that he embodied that exercise in a way that I have never seen anyone embody it before. The ocean scene I talk about a lot, and I'm really highlighting that because I think it was so well done from just a standpoint, because we don't see the ocean. We can't see the ocean, yes? But instead, a bright light shines from behind the audience. And that is the ocean, which I will call out the lighting designer of Stacey DeRosier and the associate lighting designer of Tom Turner for this. Because the sea doesn't need to be the sea. Because the sea is a light. That is a theme throughout the show, where they both want to see. Where they both have their own struggles. Jake with Huntington's disease and physically not being able to reach the sea alone. And Chris with his mother. He can't leave his mother because, family. And I think that that's a massive theme of the show, is legacy and family, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the light of the sea being a physical light shows the end of their journey, shows the light at the end of the tunnel, which doesn't always mean death. It sometimes just means getting what you want and being happy. It's the end of dark times. And it's very symbolic to have Jake and Chris together looking ahead towards brighter times, which I think is a gorgeous, glorious end of the show. my final thought is the theme of legacy throughout this show is so poignant and beautiful, where we have the legacy of Clark, William Clark, who is embodied through Jake, where it's revealed throughout the show where he's not actually a great person. He's a colonizer. But he still did something. And the legacy of actually doing something with your life, being remembered 200 years down the road, is something to be aspirational towards, where it's something like 95% of people are forgotten within 3 generations. I think it's something like that. I'm not going to look it up right now. But, you know, not everyone is remembered. And there's a place to be at peace with that. But there's also always going to be a want to be remembered for something. And then we get the legacy of Trisha being a mother, a struggling mother who is an addict. And yes, Trisha is seen as not the best, but you can clearly see, particularly in the start of the play, where she is trying so hard. And it's her legacy of, she wants to be remembered as a good mother. She wants to pass her legacy to Chris, who will turn out to be a good person, not in spite of Trisha, but because, and she is failing. And you never want your legacy to be a failure. And it's this intertwining of, we get Clark's legacy with Jake and Trisha's legacy with Chris. And I think that it's so beautiful to see the complete 180 of Jake wanting to retrace William Clark's steps and Chris wanting to run from Trisha's. They're complete opposites, and yet they're complete opposites because they want the same thing, which is to be something. And I think that's something that we all can learn is, you know, people do things that are wildly different from each other. And everyone is different, but we all, to mostly the same extent, or to some extent, want to be something, want to be remembered, want to have a legacy. So I'll leave you with that. What do you want your legacy to be? And what do you have to do to make it happen? This was my review of Clarkston. Thank you. Hopefully I'll see you again. Why not?